Hello, and welcome to the Psych Leadership Podcast, the podcast where we discuss the intersection between psychology, leadership, and your small business. My name is Luke Upchurch, and as always, I'm happy that you took time out of your day to hang out with me a little bit. So it's been a couple weeks, folks. I told you that I was trying to get back into a regular schedule of doing these podcasts. Well, my capstone project took a little bit of extra time, so I hope that you'll give me some grace there. And in any case, I finally got the chance to turn that in this week. A tremendous weight has been lifted from me. So glad to be finished with that. And at the same time, in this weird space of not real sure what I'm going to do next, I've kicked around the idea of going after my doctorate. And frankly, I'm not sure that the juice is worth the squeeze. But at the same time, I really love to learn. So I hope that's a problem maybe that you've had in your life. That juxtaposition of I'm so happy to be at a point that I can take a breather, that I can rest a little bit, and at the same time you're hungry enough that maybe you just don't want to rest, if that makes sense. But that's kind of the space I'm living in right now. In any case, last time we talked a lot about mentorship, talked about the idea that it's really about growing people, not just careers. We're going to pivot a little bit and talk about culture. The concept being that culture can either be a place that we thrive or it can be a toxic environment. And the culture that you build with your team sets the precedence really for the success that you'll have. I've seen so many teams out there that and this happens a lot with bigger companies. They have this mantra of let's push towards these metrics, whether it's a dollar amount, whether it is customer engagement, XYZ, metrics that they aim for, and that's their sole focus. And really, if you can pivot your mindset and focus more on the individual, more on people, and understand that the other things, the money, the customer engagement scores, even things like call center metrics, such as average handle time or hold time, those things, if that's your focus, then you're really just motivating your staff to do just enough to stay off your radar. If your focus is on the people, you'll still get those other things. It's just more of a side effect, a happy accident, if you will. And so that's really what we're diving into today is getting into culture as a whole. Whether that's a thriving culture or a toxic culture, it shapes your team's growth. This is going to be a two-part series, by the way. So if you like what you hear today, come back next week and we'll have another heaping helping, just a little bit more there to top off your plate. So now that we've kind of covered the highlights there, I'm going to tell you a little story about a team culture that I had to deal with not too long ago. We had an individual on the team that the individual was I'd say probably one of the best in the business. Um, I won't get into the specifics of this person's role, but they were fantastic at what they do. The trouble was that they created a toxic environment for other folks. And so what I mean by that is that if your team doesn't have things like psychological safety, for example, if they're afraid to speak up, then you're really you're shirking yourself of additional ideas that would come into the fold, right? They get in this mindset of, well, if I speak up, so and so is going to yell at me, or if my opinion doesn't match the boss's opinion, then I'm just going to be shut down. And that's not a good space to be in, right? That really, you've seen the memes on LinkedIn, things like a team's culture is only based on how much they tolerate bad behavior. Well, that couldn't be more true, right? So if you have that person on your team that is um, exhibiting that bad behavior and you're allowing it to continue, you can't be super surprised when your team doesn't want to speak up. Well, that's the problem that we were having with our team. We had all of these intelligent folks on the team, excellent backgrounds, excellent experience, and yet they were afraid to speak up because this one individual was a little combative, we'll say. Big personality, and there's nothing wrong with having a big personality, mind you. It's a matter of how, how do you broadcast that? How do you share that, right? And this individual, if your opinion was different than his, then you must be an idiot, and he would let you know in no uncertain terms. And so whenever we would try to brainstorm as a team, we'd talk through, whatever challenge we're facing. And I would ask the question, and mind you, I pride myself on the fact that my team is all better at their day job than I am, right? If they're just carbon copies of me, then what's the damn point? Right. So I really try to have a diversified team. And it is a challenge, especially in my line of work, because, sometimes we're dealing with contractors, and we've talked about that on this podcast before. But in any case, I would ask for opinions on how we solve things, whatever challenge we might have been facing at the time. And it's just me and the crickets, right? Nobody is speaking up. Nobody has an opinion. And then if this guy would say anything, people would dogpile on. Okay. And as soon as you see that type of behavior, you know that you are in a toxic work environment. Okay. It's all right to agree with somebody, but to just agree with them for the sake of not getting screamed at isn't good. And the way that you differentiate is if somebody says, yeah, I agree, me too, ask a follow-up question. Well, what is it about so and so's idea that brings you joy, that brings you hope that it is the correct solution? And if they stutter and stammer over their words, well, they really weren't agreeing with the idea as much as they were trying to suffice the person or satisfy the person, right? They don't want to challenge, and therefore they agree, right? They're not looking for that confrontation, and so they just agree just to shut you up. There's your toxic environment. And so in this case, I couldn't tell you how many times my boss would jump on the phone with me and he says, well, we've got to encourage everybody to turn on their cameras. We have to try to get them to engage. And the thought was, as well, if you turn on your cameras, then maybe we can read the body language. Maybe we can see if you truly agree or if you're just, trying to satisfy the audience. The problem is that with that type of environment, turning on the camera almost puts a spotlight on it, if you will, right? Instead of believing that they are empowered, that they can speak up, now it's almost, I guess the best analogy I would use is it's almost like an interrogation, right? Empty room, bulb shining right on you. Now, do you agree with my opinion? Well, of course you do. What else would you say? What else are you going to challenge? Especially if you're dealing with contractors versus a full-time employee. And mind you, this full-time employee made no bones about the idea that he was a full-time employee. And so those contractors, they're they were made to feel in many occasions that their opinion just simply didn't matter, that at the end of the day, this person ruled supreme, and you either agree with them or you get the hell out, right? And so this culture continued on for quite some time, actually. We dealt with this over and over again of the team doesn't speak up. This person's ideas are the only ideas on the table. And it doesn't matter if those ideas are good or bad. And mind you, I'm not saying that they were bad. I'm just saying that if there's no diversity of thought in your team, then you've already lost this war. Okay? So it's not about whether the ideas are good or bad. It's just that they're a singular focus. They're monolithic. And so in any case, this went on for a while. My leader keeps saying, why doesn't anybody speak up? And I keep saying, well, I think I know, right? I have a background in this stuff. I might have an idea. And it continued on. Well, eventually, this person decides to seek other opportunities, right? I won't get into the details as to the why, the how, the what, but one way or another, seeks other opportunity. And it was, and this is another telltale sign of a toxic work environment or a toxic culture on your team. If you have a person like that on your team, there's a few different personality types. And in this case, we were dealing with, um, no, you know what? I'm not going to diagnose it, but um, an easy way to deal with this particular personality type is to simply remove the power, right? A person like that, a person that believes that their ideas are the only ones that truly hold weight, they need to have that ego fluffed every now and again, right? It's it's important to their psyche to have somebody tell them that they are great. And if eventually that power starts to dwindle, if their word carries less weight, they eventually will find their meal elsewhere, right? They need that satisfaction, I guess you'd say, to make them feel like they're making a difference. And so this person eventually decided that they felt like their word wasn't carrying as much punch, as much impact, and so they sought other opportunities. Inside a week of this person leaving, my boss calls me up and says, "The team's acting different. What changed? People are speaking up. People have opinions. People suddenly have ideas." Well, no shit. We finally stopped dealing with or stopped having to deal with this toxic individual. And so once they're gone, then suddenly you can breathe, right? It's almost like taking off your loosening your belt after a big Thanksgiving dinner, right? I can finally breathe. That's exactly how it was. And then the funny thing is here we were pushing other concepts like, speaking up on meetings and making sure you turn on your camera and engage in chat. And it was like pulling teeth, begging folks to do this. Well, suddenly we join meetings and brother, all those cameras flip right on. Everybody is smiling. Everybody is engaged. There's even an individual on our team that traditionally is very, very quiet. They will answer questions when directly asked, but this person doesn't offer a lot of extra conversation. Definitely is not one to tease or joke around. They are all business all the time. Well, suddenly this person starts joking around, starts teasing with the team. Now we're cutting it up. It, I cannot express to you enough how different the team dynamic, the culture will change as soon as you, the leader, stop putting up with that bad behavior. Now, I need you to think through on your team right now. Do you have somebody on your team that exhibits these types of behaviors, that through their nature is pulling the rest of the team down? Now, if you've got that person's name in your head, you can picture their face, you know exactly who I'm talking about. You have to ask yourself the question, does this person recognize the behavior as a problem? And so this is no different than trying to get an alcoholic to finally put down the beer. Okay. It's no different than getting that person that's addicted to cigarettes or drugs, or insert your vice here. It's no different than getting them to back down from that. If the person doesn't see the behavior as a problem, doesn't want to change, you are not going to change them. It doesn't matter if you write them up. It doesn't matter if you tell them that they are shirking their responsibilities or that they're missing deadlines, especially if they exhibit those narcissistic personalities. They believe that you, in fact, are the problem because you don't understand their greatness, because they believe that they are on a mountain on high coming down to decree upon the world their vision. And so the fact that you don't understand this, the fact that you don't agree with this or find value in this, well, shit, that's your problem. That's their view. Okay. So if they don't want to change and there isn't anything that you can do to make them change, then you have to ask yourself a question. Is the value that they bring worth the baggage or the drama that comes with it? I'll put up with a certain amount of bullshit if you are rock solid, fantastic. If that does not bleed into the team. Okay. So I'll give you another example. A team that I worked with a few years back, we had a gentleman that, again, probably the best out there, but his emotional intelligence was lacking a little bit. He didn't understand business acumen, didn't necessarily understand the dynamics of team A needs team B, and both teams are financed separately. So just because it's important to you doesn't mean it's important to them, right? So we would ask teams for help and they would blow us off, and this guy would kind of get pissy about it, right? And sometimes that came up in meetings, and sometimes I had to go um, troubleshoot. I had to, reach out to those teams and basically make excuses for this person. You probably have this same kind of person somewhere in your friend group, somewhere in your family, right? You know that they're kind of annoying. You know that they have some bad habits, whether it's something as simple as chewing with their mouth open. I still don't know why that exists, by the way. It drives me nuts. Whether it's something like that, or whether it's, they speak on things that maybe they should just keep their mouth shut, right? What's the old adage? Better be thought a fool than to open your mouth and remove all doubt, right? So I dealt with this other person on the team, and although they had some annoying behaviors, those annoying behaviors really didn't impact the team a bunch. Now, eventually it did start creating extra drama for me, right? Because I'm taking time trying to put out the fires that you started. And so I had to have that kind of conversation with the person. That person was then able to take the feedback and began changing their ways. Now, I don't work with this person as much directly, but they still reach out to me to say, hey, this was the situation. This is how I approached it. Do you have any feedback? Do you have any insights? How can I do better? Okay. So that's a distinct difference. If the person's bad behaviors bleed into your team, that's drama that you don't need. That's when you need to ask yourself the question, is there drama or baggage? Is the impact on the team worth the skill set that they have? Because, folks, I'm here to tell you, I will take somebody with 80% of the skill and 0% of the drama all day long. No question. No question mark at the end of that sentence. That is an explanation point, maybe two, right? I would much rather have somebody that takes a little longer to do things, that needs to research a little more, that maybe hasn't fully developed the skill or the experience to do the task at hand. I would rather have that than the person that can absolutely knock it out of the park. But, brother, they're going to create all kinds of drama for your team. And I promise you, the longer you put up with them, the more good people you will lose as a result. So that person that was on the team that I'm on, in my day job, it was getting to the point that, frankly, I was starting to look. I wasn't sure that I was willing to continue to put out the fires that this person was starting, or that I could tolerate that kind of behavior anymore. And I wasn't the only one. I was hearing noise from the rest of the team. So the fact that less than 7 days after they left, now I'm getting feedback from my leadership. Hey, what happened to the team? Why all of a sudden this change of heart? The proof's in the pudding, ladies and gentlemen. So culture, whether that is thriving or toxic, it's going to shape your team's growth. So how do you develop that culture, though? Now that we have a solid definition of culture, how do we begin developing it? Well, let's. You know what? Actually, I don't know that we have thoroughly defined culture just yet. I got ahead of myself, folks. Let's step back just a little bit and define workplace culture. So, workplace culture, the best analogy that I can give you is this is the water that the fish are swimming in. It's invisible, but it's impactful, right? If the water that you are swimming in, imagine that you're a fish in a big ocean or a giant fish tank, however you want to think about this. If the water around you is not pure, if it has other carcinogens in it, or other toxicity going on, that's going to impact you. And it won't impact you all at once. It's not necessarily going to kill you right now, but it does slowly poison you. Okay. So when we talk about workplace culture, this is a shared value, behaviors, and norms. This is the acceptable aspects of those elements within your work environment. And I say acceptable, that doesn't mean acceptable in the larger culture, in society's culture. It is what you tolerate within your team. And understand, you as the leader, you are setting the stage. Whether you realize it or not, you are setting the stage with culture. So I'm going to give you a couple examples of that. We have a lot of leaders that in certain organizations I've worked for over the years, they when they move you to a salary role, definitions of salaried roles are a little different depending on your industry. Right? When I worked in retail, I asked, "How do you define a salary role?" And they said, "Well, it's usually 50 to 60 hours a week, and it can vary, but that's kind of the norm." Folks, I'm here to tell you, 50, 60 hours a week if you're an executive in retail, that's you'll get teased for that. They'll call you part-timer and things like that. When I worked retail, I remember having to sleep in my car sometimes, not because I was poor, not because I lived that far away from the office, but because after you work 15 plus hours of hard physical labor, I wasn't confident that I could drive the 10 minutes back to my house without causing an accident. So I would come back to my car, put the seat down, drape a shirt or something over my eyes so I could sleep in the sunlight. But as you move into other types of salaried roles, maybe they have a little bit different culture at that company. Maybe they actually want you to stick to 40 hours, for example. But as the leader, you're actually setting the tone for that. If you manage your work life balance and clock out, log out, close your system, show offline, whatever the nature of your business is, if you do that on a regular basis at a good time of the day, 5 o'clock, if that makes sense for your business, for example, that starts setting the stage to your team. If you allow the team to talk instead of constantly interjecting your own opinions, that is setting the culture for the team. With that in mind, there's a concept from a psychologist, Edgar, I believe it's pronounced Schein, Schein, from Edgar Schein on organizational culture. And he provides this framework. And in fact, you've probably seen this graphic before. It's usually depicted as some sort of iceberg. Okay. At the very top, you have artifacts. These are your visible elements of culture, the surface level manifestation of culture. They include everything that you can see, hear, or feel within an organization. So these are things like the dress code, the office layout, the language or jargon that is used there, company rituals and ceremonies, even technology and the physical environment. So essentially, these are the easy to observe but not easy to interpret without understanding the deeper layers. Okay. Then you have it's called espoused value, or which is semi-visual. Okay. These are the things that's the posters on the wall, if you will. Things like mission statements, code of conduct, strategic goals, and leadership philosophies. The value of each of these is dependent on a combination of, do the words match the actions? And so that's really important, right? I can say that, for instance, part of our culture is about making sure that people can speak up and share their opinions, right? Just to give you a simplistic example, I can say that I value your insights, but if the minute that you speak up, I stamp those out, well, then my words didn't necessarily back up what I put on that poster in the break room. Okay, so again, these I say semi-visual. Yes, there are employers that are actually going to put these on the walls to literally decorate the break room and the hallways, the offices, and whatnot with these concepts. a lot of times in bigger corporations, they are talked about. So, for example, the company I work for, they do these big town halls. And at every town hall that you go to, there is some slide deck, there is some reference to these are the goals that we are aiming for holistically. And maybe we even break those down. Right? Maybe we break those down to say this is a 3-year goal, this is year 1, year 2, year 3, etc. So, espoused values guide behavior and they serve as justifications for decisions. They don't always align with what is actually happening, though, the enacted values. Okay. Underneath that, you have your basic underlining assumptions, and these are invisible rather. These are deeply embedded, taken for granted benefits and assumptions that drive true behavior. Hey, sorry to interrupt the show. I just wanted to ask you a quick favor. If you are enjoying this content, consider a follow, a review, or if you're on YouTube, a like and subscribe. You can even comment directly and let me know what topics you might like me to discuss in the future. You can also reach out to me via any of the social media platforms. I'd love to engage further to understand how I can help your business. All right, enough of that. Back to the show. So examples of this might be human nature, right? Whether or not a person can or cannot be trusted. Time, for example. So punctuality is often a sign of respect in company cultures, or even just concepts like a meeting running long, right? If I schedule a meeting and I allow it to go over time consistently, I'm telling you that your time is not a huge value to me, that my time is more important. And if the whole company does that, well, then I bet that same company doesn't really have respect for the work life balance, right? For the 40-hour work week. Um, so those are that's the model that you've typically seen. And usually when you see this, like I said, you've probably seen this in graphics somewhere. You might not have known the name of it, but it is the model of organizational culture, and it's usually depicted as an iceberg, where the artifacts is the piece above the water, and that's just a small chunk. The other two pieces, the espoused and the basic underlying assumptions, that's all below the surface. That's stuff that you typically won't know until you've worked with the company for a while, until you've gotten a chance to experience it on your own. So now that we have a solid understanding of what culture is, let's spend some time talking about signs of a thriving culture. Right? I've given you some examples of toxic culture, but let's pivot a little bit. Let's talk about a thriving culture. So here, trust and open communication reign supreme. The best way I would describe this is that with my team that I manage in my day job, and I use this. I'm going to give you a couple of different examples here because I do have the day job. I also have a nonprofit that my wife and I operate called Rise Up Academics. By the way, quick little side note: we finally got our legitimate URL, so we're not using a free Wix site anymore. It is riseupacademics.org. So please check that out. We're doing some really cool stuff over there. In any case, a to have an environment of positive culture, one of the things that you're going to need is that high trust and open communication. So I'll use Rise Up Academics as an example here. At that company, I am the CEO, I'm the co-founder, so I deal a lot with our strategy. When it comes to specific other operations, I have to be able to delegate that work and I have to be able to let go and stay out of it. That can be a challenge as a leader, right? Especially if you have been in a culture, in an environment where you are incentivized based on outcomes and not necessarily building people. Okay? So that's a top-down culture that you have to kind of figure out on your own. But within Rise Up Academics, my wife and I create the culture, right? we get to steer this ship instead of just being passengers on it. And so in that space, for example, we have our website has updates that are necessary all the time. And within that space, we have a technology consultant on the team. Now, many of you know my background. I spent a lot of time dabbling in IT. Most of my past jobs have been what I would call IT outside of IT. So, doing jobs in the IT space without necessarily having the IT title or even a fully developed IT skill set. Okay. But in this space, web design, I went to school for web design. I can do that stuff in my sleep. Um, so when I have this this technology consultant, it's not a matter of I can't do the job. It's more a matter of I don't have time to do it, and this person has actually had the legitimate training. So whereas I am more of a kind of akin to a YouTube mechanic, right? I can fix what's broken on website design. I understand how to do it, but I also had that training back in, I don't know, 25 years ago. So just because I know how to do it doesn't mean I know the best way, the most modern way to do it. And so when I'm working with my technological consultant there, I simply provide the guardrails. I just let her know these are the things that I'm looking for. These are the markers of success or how I would measure success in this space. And then I get out of the way. I trust that she is going to deliver and that if I have feedback, that I can provide that. But I have to be trusting enough. I have to let go of those reins and know that the picture that I had in my head may not exactly be what's going to manifest, right? If I have that trusting environment and that honest communication, that if I see something that is definitely outside the lines, then I can give that feedback and that I'm open to receiving the feedback. That's a big caveat, leaders. It's a two-way street. You can't be mad at your team for not being willing to accept feedback if you, as the orchestrator of the culture, do not follow that same mantra. Okay? So, high trusting, open communication environments. That bleeds right into the concept of psychological safety. I did a whole podcast on that, folks, so I am not going to dive into that concept again here, but I'll encourage you to go back and listen to that podcast. Psychological safety is a lot more than a buzzword, ladies and gentlemen. It is really the bedrock of success for your team. If your team doesn't feel that they can speak up, then you're doomed to be a micromanager because you haven't established the culture to allow for anything else. Next thing I'm going to ask you to focus on in terms of signs of a thriving culture is clear purpose and values. So people want to feel a sense of belonging. We've talked about this as well. This is Ryan and Dece's self-determination theory. One of the key attributes to having intrinsic motivation is having a sense of belonging, meaning that the people need to understand that what they do has an impact on the goals that the company has. So I'll use Rise Up Academics as an example again here. Our primary objective with that organization is to provide leadership and mentoring opportunities for students. And so going back to our website and the content of that website, if my web designer, if my technology consultant understands that our core goal is not to get rich, it is not to make other people rich, it is the currency that we deal with is inexperience. We want to provide our students, our interns, with an experience that becomes a bullet on their resume that defines whether or not they want to continue this line of work into their collegiate studies and beyond. Okay. So, because I have shared that, then everything that she puts on the website has to kind of go through that filter. And it gives her a sense of belonging because she understands that when she creates content on the website, that is helping us get our message out. That is increasing the efficacy of the internship programs that we offer. It is also increasing the caliber of intern that wants to be associated with our organization. So, by having those clear shared purposes and those values, and by building that into things like team meetings and tying back everything that we accomplish back to those goals, everybody has that clear picture. The next thing that is a typical sign of a thriving culture, this is really simple, folks: low turnover, high engagement. So if you have a team that is constantly churning through people, right, one of two things is happening. And well, there's when I say one of two things is happening here, there's often a lie that bad leaders tell themselves. So some leaders, when they see high turnover on their team, they dust off their badge and say, well, that's because I'm just a kick-ass leader, right? I train my people, they get what they need, they move on. So it's they tell themselves this lie that it's indicative of their excellence. And if you ever hear a leader say that, if you're interviewing on a team and you ask about turnover and you hear that kind of answer, just leave. Don't say anything. Get up from the table, walk away. That is not the culture that you want. That is absolutely a sign of a bad culture. Good culture, thriving culture, has low turnover. People want to be there. They're excited to be there. So again, I'll use the board of directors for Rise Up Academics. In our bylaws, we actually call out the idea, as most companies do, most nonprofits will do, that you can only serve on the board for 2 years. And after that, you have to basically get approval from the board. So your normal term, you're voted in for a 2-year term. And if you want to serve longer, it has to be a unanimous vote from the board. So everybody has to agree, you've been doing your job, you should keep doing your job. Well, this year, we have officially been around for 2 years. So the entire board had to go through voting. We have to document that for the state of Kentucky. And when I asked folks if they wanted to step down, nobody wanted to step down. Everybody is clear on the vision. They have psychological safety. They have high trust, open communication. Every single person on our board is still on our board. They also voted to maintain their jobs. They all wanted to continue doing the same thing. They wanted to continue to expand upon that. Okay. So this is a prime example of a company here that, although we're small, has extremely low turnover. I think we've lost 2 board members since we've been in existence, both of which, because this is a non-paid position and frankly their day job or their life, created less time to devote to something like this. So what are some other companies that you think of? Well, think of the companies that are difficult to get on. So Netflix is one that comes to mind. And there's multiple case studies about this. In fact, I believe the book Think Like a Freak goes through a really good Netflix anecdote. So I'd encourage you to go out there and check that out. But essentially, in that environment, they constantly have this mantra of check your titles at the door. I don't care if you're the CEO, the director, the VP, or you're the janitor. Your opinions are valuable and they are part of what makes this company move forward. That is the general mindset of a company like Netflix. Now ask yourself, when you've been out there on Indeed, when you were trying to hire for your team as a leader, how often have you seen any jobs available for Netflix? They don't come up very often because people like it, because people want to stay there. Okay. So, again, another telltale sign: whenever you see high turnover, chances are it's not for good reasons. Either the company is growing exponentially or they've got poor leaders that put up with poor behavior. And so the good people find other jobs and the bad people continue screwing up. So now let's pivot a little bit and talk about signs of a toxic culture. So, folks, this isn't rocket science, right? It's basically the exact opposite of what we just said. So fear-based decision making is the first thing that comes to mind when I think of a toxic culture. So this is, I have to make this decision correctly or I will lose my job. I have to make this decision correctly or I'm going to be verbally berated, or I'm going to draw the short straw and apparently have to do that overnight production turn or work the weekend shift, et cetera, et cetera. Micromanaging or unclear leadership is another clear-cut decision. If you as a leader do not trust your team enough to make proper decisions, either you're not giving them the guidance to make the right decisions or you've made some poor hiring decisions, right? It's one of the two. So if you believe that they have the right decisions and you believe that you're a good hiring manager and you've hired the right skill set, then go do something else. Let them make the decisions and understand that, not unlike a parent, there are going to be times that they're going to have to fail. You can't swoop in and save them, right? If I'm trying to teach my kid how to ride a two-wheel bike, I have to eventually let go of the bike itself, right? They're never going to learn to balance. They're never going to learn how to recover if they never fail. So you have to be willing to step away. Other things that you'll typically see with toxic cultures is gossip or cliques, passive aggressive types of behaviors. Those aren't allowed to thrive in a positive culture, nor are they necessary. But if I am not getting the attention that I need as a worker, if I do not feel that sense of belonging, going back to self-determination, right? If I don't feel that sense of belonging or competence or autonomy, then I'm going to find it elsewhere. And typically that is in small subgroups. So if you start seeing people kind of break off in subgroups or have passive aggressive behaviors in meetings, that is another telltale sign. Burnout and high attrition, we don't need to discuss this, folks. That's really obvious. Okay. And with that, I'm going to ask for a little bit of reflection from you. Have you ever been on a team where you felt silenced, where you felt that your opinion had no value and therefore chose to not offer it? Now, let me ask you, how long did you stay with that team? I'm willing to bet if you stayed with that team, it was a function of the devil I know, right? It's better, the devil I know is better than the enemy that I don't. And so maybe you tolerated it for a while. But one of the principles in psychology is that at the minute that the effort I have to put in to maintain that farce, as soon as that it outweighs the benefits I'm getting, I'm out, right? You're going to walk away from that job. So have you ever felt silenced on a team? And how long did you stick it out? All right. So now let's talk a little bit about the psychology behind culture. So we've hit on this a little bit so far. And by the way, we're almost coming to a close for this episode. So if you haven't already, mark in your calendar, we're going to have next episode 1 week from today. Um, I'm actually recording them in the same session, so I can guarantee that I will actually have it out in that timeline. So the psychology behind culture. First off, we tend to, whenever we're talking about companies, you get into a little bit of groupthink. Okay, so be aware that that is an aspect of culture as well. That whenever you're dealing with, usually, typically groupthink represents itself or manifests itself rather when you have two or more people. 3 people is kind of the magic number, but that's where you're going to get this almost a mob mentality, if you will. And so, in my effective presentations conversation, one of my other podcasts, if you haven't checked out, be sure to do that. But I talk about this idea of, if you can get 2 or 3 people to believe in your cause, then the rest of the folks tend to follow. Well, that also means that 2 or 3 people against your cause. the rest of them will follow. So be aware of that concept within a team culture. Okay. If you start to see those clicks, well, then the groupthink really becomes an issue. And it's not bad to have a little bit of cohesiveness. So groupthink isn't all bad, but something that will help you to turn that from a negative into a positive is diversity of thought. Getting additional folks in there, making sure that as you're hiring, that you're not fishing in the same pond all the time, right? If my entire team consists of middle-aged white guys, then I'm going to get a lot of middle-aged white guys ideology. Mind you, I am a middle-aged white guy, and I'm telling you that we sure as hell don't have all the right ideas. So I always strive to have a wide variety of both cultures, as well as backgrounds in terms of life, things like that. So I want young, I want old, I want educated, non-educated, just a mixed bag. And that'll help to kind of manage that group think. The leader has a lot of impact on the culture overall. And so when you think of again, the psychology behind culture, it's important to understand that as a leader, every action that you take or don't take is viewed more than you realize. The best analogy I can give you is think parent to child, okay? And I'm not trying to say that you are as a leader, you shouldn't feel like you are at the top of the pyramid, right? That your associates are your children and therefore will mind and obey and do as they're told, right? That's the wrong part of this analogy. So, but if you think about the way that children learn from their parents, the phrases that they use, the behavior that is tolerated, all those things, if a child is misbehaving, you usually don't have to look too far to see the reason why. Well, the same thing can be said with your team. If your team is a bunch of overgrown babies throwing temper tantrums because they didn't get their way, talking rudely to one another, that is a function of what they have seen you either do yourself or allow. So take stock in that, right? It's if you've ever heard that old country song, there's I couldn't tell you the artist, but the guy sings about basically his son sitting in the back seat and somebody runs a red light or a stop sign or something. He slams on the brake and French fries go everywhere and the drink spills all over the kid, and then the kid curses. And the dad says, well, where did you hear that kind of language? And the chorus says something to the effect of, I've been watching you. Ain't that cool, Dad? Right? It's the exact same thing, folks. Your team watches you. They understand, even at a subconscious level, what types of behavior you tolerate, what types of behavior you allow, the cultural norms on your team, and they're going to mimic that for better or worse. So how do you kind of self-reflect? How do you get a little bit more insightful on what that culture is? Well, one of the easiest ways, folks, is to have some sort of feedback loop. A lot of companies will have a associate engagement or an associate culture survey, and understand a survey is really an unspoken contract, right? I ask for your opinion. If I do nothing with that opinion, how often are you going to give it next time, right? It's like, for those of you that are parents, your kid says, hey mom, hey dad, how should I do this thing? How should I handle this situation? And you tell them, and they say, yeah, I'm gonna do what I was gonna do in the first place, right? They say it a little bit nicer, but they basically say, well, I appreciate your ideas, but screw you, I'm doing my own thing. Well, the next time that they ask for your opinion, you're a little bit more reluctant, right? And if you can't equate this to a child, equate this to your friends. We all have friends that do this to us. Ask our opinion, and then they do whatever the hell they want. And so the next time they ask, maybe you're a little bit more reluctant to give it. And then eventually you stonewall, right? I'm not going to give you my opinion. You don't listen to what I have to say anyway. What difference does it make? Okay. So a survey, a culture survey like that is the same kind of thing. If you're going to bother asking the question, you have to shut up and listen and then take action. If your team is telling you that they're seeing that you micromanage, for example, or that you don't communicate your expectations well, if you don't take a stance in humility and actively seek to adjust that, well, then you just doomed your own fate, right? Your culture is going to fail because you didn't have enough gas, as my one of my past guests says. On our last episode, I had Mr. Donnie Disler, 21-year Navy vet, and he uses the term gas, apparently a military acronym for give a shit, right? So if you don't exhibit any gas in terms of those survey results, well, then you get what you get, right? All right. So, folks, we are at a good stopping point. I'm going to stop this one right here. I hope you enjoyed the content. We will be back next week for episode 2 of Thriving or Toxic Cultures. Thank you and have a great day.
Hey, you made it all the way to the end of the podcast. Thank you so much for spending a little bit of time with me. Again, if you like this content, don't hesitate to reach out. You can also connect with me on my various social media accounts. So reach out. Let's have a conversation. I look forward to working with you. Have a great day.